Good late morning, early afternoon, guys and girls. I've had my nice cup of tea, a chat with the bell ringers and thanked them, lovely people. Met a few of them before anyway. One of them is 87 years old. He was the one that was ringing that single peal. Frankie's name is, lovely old bloke. You know the old school, they're not backwards in coming forwards. He went, yeah, you're alright, you are. He went, not like some young people. He went, no, not like some bloody old ones either. So he went, yeah. But anyway, cut a long story short, I was talking to my friend Carol Brabender. She's the church warden here. I was chatting to her, and she watched one of my Churchyard lives on YouTube the other night. Her granddaughter managed to sort it out for her so she could watch it, and she went, you've covered a lot of churchyards. She went, and she was joking, she went, I see you've not covered ours. She went, our parishioners will think themselves quite ill done by it. I went, yeah, I've not done this one actually, so here we are. Many of the gravestones are completely worn away, and I do mean completely worn away. But we'll start off with this one, if I can make it out. Here lies ye body of Thomas More, who departed this life April ye 6, 1670, being then church warden of this parish. And you can see it has been vandalised. This isn't ordinary damage, it was spray painted a silver colour and then had some weird stuff put all over, like designs and stuff put all over it. But yeah, he was one of the church wardens, and the inscription, I will tag it on because it's in my booklet, which unfortunately I didn't bring with me, and it's got something, here lies ye body of Thomas, of whom was here bestowed it many years, but who is no more, because that now lies dear, and in this place doth lie sepulchred. Oh, well, that wasn't too bad. I was able to read that, and the little arrows pointing down shows that Thomas More, not the Thomas More who you think of Thomas More of famous memory, obviously a bit later, and not that one, but Thomas More, church warden, died in 1670. And he was, and I can feel it with my finger, 56 years old. And he was a much loved church warden, hence why he got such a prominent place. And he's still there to this day, buried here. Thomas More, church warden. It's been vandalised, got a great crack on it. They think that was done through vandalism as well, because when they had all the graffiti jet washed off the week after, there was a great big boot print on it and this great crack. So there we are. That's the morals of some people. But there we are, Thomas More. I won't do over here because there are newer parishioners, modern day ones, and I don't think that's right to cover without permission. But as you can see, a lot of them are completely worn away. Like these ones here, these are all pretty much from the 1700s. That little low down one there, that's one of the early ones, like the grave of Jane Young. Jane Young, I've done a complete separate post for her, or a complete separate video for her, because there's a little bit of a legend around Jane Young. But these ones, these are made from a porous stone, and after a while, especially with particularly frost, they just completely and utterly, they flake away. And this one unfortunately is in the process of doing this. If you are very interested in all the graves individually here, go on to findagrave.com and search for user member Luke1984. That's me. I'll probably put the link on my Facebook page, or maybe on the YouTube as well if I can do it as a post. And I've covered pretty much, well, I've covered all the graves in the churchyard here that are legible. It took me quite some time to do it. But this one is William Goodacre, and he was born in 1853. And then you've got Catherine Goodacre, and she was the wife of Henry Goodacre, and she died March the 14th, 1898, aged 98 years. She died being glad and full of days. Job XL11 17. So yeah, that's the Goodacre family. As you see, most of them are worn away. I do know a few, even the ones that are worn away, like the Parsons family, who I do want to focus on, in memory of Robert Henry Gosling, who departed this life January the 27th, 1876, aged 37. Also Daniel Gosling, father of the above, who died September the 27th, 1884, aged 65. Also Mary Jane, wife of the above Daniel Gosling, who died September the 7th, 1892, aged 71 years. Her end was peace. And I wanted to get this one covered because, like Harold did suggest to me, because of the blistering, some of these inscriptions in a few years' time aren't going to be legible anymore. So anyone that does have links to this page, I'll probably put a link on my Find a Grave thing. I don't do it anymore because with the Find a Grave, when you do it, you literally get hundreds and hundreds of requests from people. Can you go and find this grave? Can you find that grave? And it got a bit much in the end. I did say to people I wouldn't mind doing it in East London Cemetery and here, but they started wanting me to go all over the place, and I had to turn off the request section of that. These are all 1700s graves as well. This one here was the 1600s one, and that man's name was John Robert Coston. And interestingly enough, not that he knows that it's connected, but Rob, who used to do my editing, my mate Rob, who go away on holiday with, he's Robert Coston. But as far as he knows, his family's always been in the Isle of Wight, because his granddad did a family tree. And he went right back to the 1600s, and he was lucky because they've more or less been within the same couple of parishes. Here you see another piece of vandalism, and this was vandalism, fairly recent by the whiteness of the stone. That one too, and another one over there. What they do is they run along, and I don't know why, so if anyone says to me, why do people do this? I honestly do not know. People run along and they boot the stones. So here you've got sacred to the memory of James Bones, died 5th of April 1835, aged 56. Also Anne Bones, died 9th of April 1856, aged 84 years. Also Flora, what's that? Flora Joanna, the beloved wife of George H. Nairn, who died 10th of February 1907, aged 83 years. Also of the above, George Henry Nairn, who died, and this is a bit difficult because the lettering's gone, 2nd of, and that looks like June. Oh goodness. No, sorry guys and girls, the rest of the writing's gone on that one. And then it's got something Sarah below, but the writing's all gone on those ones, unfortunately. Oh crumbs. Here we have one of our older ones that's still got a bit of detail in it, and the detail, you can catch this better in certain lights. In the winter when it's damp, you'll never ever see this. I've caught it pretty much on a good day today. Here lieth the body of Thomas Parsons, who died August the 17th, I do know this one, 1753, aged 88 years. And the verse below basically reminds the living, as I said with a lot of the things, it reminds the living to live and to be nice, and importantly to be charitable. The charitable thing, keep that in mind for the Parsons family. They're all buried together here. There's a Parsons, there's one there. This one is very, very worn away. It did have an inscription on it, but if I'm brutally honest with you, it's been so long since I've seen it that I can't remember the names. But that's a vault, that one. So that'll be from one of the wealthier parishioners. And here we've got of Catherine Robert, his beloved wife. So the man above, what's his name again? Oh, Henry Charles Robert and Catherine Robert. and she died on the 22nd of March 1836, aged 95 years, so a good old age. A lot of the parishioners in Barking, funny enough, lived to good ages. It was a bit healthier than London. London was a hellhole in many regards, and very unhealthy. Bear that in mind. We'll be seeing around very much on that. And here we have, it's completely worn away more or less. This is another Parsons at the top. You've got Robert and also the body of Mary Ann, that's right. And then you've got here Mr. John Mills, grandson of the above. So this is the Parsons family. The Parsons family, interestingly enough, were pork butchers. Some of the family were pork butchers, and some of them had a tallow chandler's shop. One of my ancestors, surname of Weatherby, they was here in the 1600s, and he was a tallow chandler, which meant that they were a tradesman, which in those days meant that you would be called a mister. I know it sounds weird because all letters to everyone's addressed Mr. and Mrs. But if you were poor and didn't have a trade in those days, you'd just be called by your name, or possibly by your surname, just by your surname. But to be called Mr. meant that you were a tradesman. And a squire meant that you were a gentleman and you didn't have to work. And then you go up from there as knights and all that kind of thing. And here we have, in memory of James Parsons, who departed this life on the 6th of November 1737, aged 60 years. And the bit below there, basically it's a small verse which also says about charity, and it says pork butcher of this parish. And here we are. He's this one. Bear in mind the Parsons, just while we cover this one, in memory of Elizabeth Guthridge, daughter of William and Eliza Best, who died on the 3rd of September 1910, aged 63, and peace after peace, perfect peace. And Carol tells me that this family of George and Eliza Best are related to George Best. He's descended from them. Not a direct grandfather or grandmother link, but they are descended. Here we have, and it is completely worn away, but I do know this one from my own research, and I really like the Parsons family, because bearing in mind this Parsons family was wealthy, not stinking rich and gentry, but they were tradesmen and they were very comfortably off. And being a pork butcher was a good trade to be in, and so was a tallow chandler. My ancestors were a bit of a mix and match really. You had the Lees on one side with their branch, which is the Hammonds, the Faulkners, and then they were all poor, like farm labourers, and they lived in Barkingside, which is a few miles away from here. But Barkingside until the 1830s didn't have its own parish church, so this is why they worshipped here. They had to come all the way from Barkingside to here to christen, marry and bury and worship on a Sunday. And anyway, in times of hardship, my ancestors, quite a few of them, would have died if it wasn't for the charity of this man and his wife, who is Mr. Thomas Parsons. He's one of the older Parsons of this parish, and the inscription, I can't remember it exactly, but he died on June 1719 and he was in his 87th year. And then you've got his wife below, who's Mrs. Martha Parsons, and she died in September, and I think it was 1723 or 25, and she was 90. And there's the church at the time, or the vicar at the time, a lot of church vicars at the time, they kept something called the church book, which is basically like a little tally keeping its eye on the parishioners who needed help, who was behaving badly, who wasn't behaving badly. And Mrs. Martha Parsons, there's quite a bit about her. She sounds like a character. One of my ancestresses, who was known as Old Mother Lee, which denotes that she was a midwife who lived quite old. Her name was Margaret Lee, and her and Martha got on very well, because Old Mother Lee delivered most of Martha's children. And Old Mother Lee became very old and infirm, lived to quite a good age actually for a poor woman, 87. And when she got very infirm, she was brought to church by our family on a chair, on a carrying chair. And Mrs. Parsons always made sure that my ancestress was looked after, so I've got a bit of a soft spot for her. And then you've got, it's Richard and Elizabeth Parsons, and also Benjamin Durins. And this is interesting because it's got widower of the above. Now, Mrs. Parsons, this is very, very interesting. Maybe a scandal, we don't know though. Mrs. Parsons, when she was widowed, there's no record of her having remarried. So this Mr. Benj, B and then comma J, Benjamin Durin, widower of the above. So, we don't know about that one. And widower of the above, and he departed this life on January the 17th, 1817, aged 67. More Parsons here. You've got in the memory of Mr. Nathaniel Parsons, and he died on the 17th of March, and that's 1760, aged 50 years. Inscription below. I don't know what that says. It's what it says. There's a monumental inscriptions book for this churchyard that was done in the 1930s. It's in Valence House Museum, and that's where I found, me and the Quakers found the location of my own ancestors' grave, because their stone was destroyed in the war, in the Second World War, and they have a newer stone on it, which me and the Quakers first arranged. That one got broken, and then someone who is another ancestress, who also now goes to this church, her and some other parishioners here arranged for the stone to be repaired. So that's the one you saw the other day of a little bit of my own history. Here we've got Mrs. Anne Anderson, widow of the above, and she died on April the 18th, 1822, in her 86th year. And then the above is Mr. James Anderson, can't remember the date. The one above is gone completely, but it is a Parsons. James Anderson is the grandson of, oh God, what was his name? It's going to bug me now. Richard Parsons. Richard Parsons. Another Parsons here, completely worn away. Damage. How long we've been, because I'm probably going to have to do this in a two-parter, because this is quite a large churchyard, and if any of you wish to see all of these, you'll have to be in it to win it, kind of thing. Sadly, most of them have worn away, but as I say, there is a monumental inscriptions book in Valence House Museum, so for anyone that is interested. Mrs. Elizabeth Ward, this one is. The sun helps sometimes, and then sometimes it doesn't. So the funny thing is, they sometimes look better on screen than they do to my eyes, although I've got poor eyesight. That's Mr. Edward Wardin. And then you've got Mrs. Elizabeth Wardin, and then Mr. William Austin is the grandson. You've got a William Parsons there, and a Philippa Parsons. Philippa's quite an unusual female name for back in those days. It was more of a Spanish name, so we don't know, was she foreign? I know some of these by heart, as I say, because my own history is here, and the Parsons played a big role in helping my ancestors, a lot of them stay alive, so I did a bit of research on these. This one is a Parsons, and this is Thomas Parsons. He was the son of Robert and Martha Parsons. He died at the age of 26, and that was in the mid-1700s. And at the bottom is the verse, which I can read bits of it, but it is very, very sad. And it basically speaks of their grief of losing their only son. Their inheritance and everything passed on through the nephew, James Parsons, who they seem to have adopted because they refer to him as their second son in the will. His parents both died young. See, like my own family with the Parsons, some of their family had money and some of them were labourers. Some of these ones are fairly well preserved. And here you've got Catherine, wife of Daniel Stephen Hope, who departed this life ye January 27th, 1698, aged 35. And this one's fairly well preserved. Oh, that's better out this sun now. Here lies the body of Samuel Kempton of Great Ilford. Died March the 1st, 1720, aged 45. And I probably will do this in a two-parter. Here lies the body of Mrs. Hannah Spicer. And then you've got Thomas Spicer, who died March, and it's completely worn away, the date, age 60. And you've got here also lies the body of Mr. Thomas Pittman, who departed this life January, and it looks like 1727, January something, 1727, aged 89 years. And you see what I mean about some of the people around here being fairly well lived or long lived. Here lieth ye body of Jane Pillman, late wife of Jane Pittman, wife of Thomas Pittman, so it must be a relation to that Pittman that's over there, of this parish. She died, spelt D-Y-E-D, the 11th day of February, 1705, aged 30 years. And these ones are fairly well preserved because they're fairly well protected by the church wall. So obviously I probably won't catch every single grave because we would be here all day. And I'll do these in increments of say half an hour. Makes it easier for people to watch then, and less thingy for me. This one's another one that got vandalised, and unfortunately the other half of it's been taken away because it was sticking up at a bit of an odd angle. But it's Mr. James Weatherby, probably definitely a relation of mine. My Weatherbys married into the Lees in the 1600s, so this will be an off-branch cousin link of my family. And he died on the 2nd of June 1871 in the aged 50 years. And then below you've got a big long verse, and then you've got also Catherine Lee Weatherby. Catherine Lee, she was the cousin of my great-great-great-grandmother. Seems to have obviously been fairly proud of her name, so kept that one. And then you've got also Major John James Lee Weatherby, and he was a major in the army. He worked his way up from a captain to a major, and he died on the 20th of April. It's 1911, I think it was 1911 or 1912, aged 92. So another fairly long-lived one. Right, and I'll show you over here because away from these people. This one's been repaired fairly recently. This is the grave of a rich parishioner. Mr. Nathaniel Hope, Esquire, his name was. Other these details or anything, I do not know anything other than that. He died a widower without children. Seems to have been rather scared of being forgotten, from what we gather in his will, because he left money to make sure that people were looked out in the parish were looked after, on the condition that they remembered him. But as you can, this one was all in pieces not long ago. If you look back on my page, you'll see it's bear with me a minute, press the wrong button, sorry. That's it. You'll see it was all taken apart. It's got a new skull on it. The skulls and cherubs and the crossbones and everything, as I say, was morbid to us, but basically reminds the living to live and to preferably do it nicely. What are we up to? We're up to 24 minutes. Done a good job on this one. It's had 2 new skulls put on it because that bit was on the floor for a while. It came down, and the skulls basically where the water runoff comes down. It wears the skulls away, as you can see by this one on this side. But yeah, they did a good job repairing that. And here we've got Elizabeth, wife of Joseph Louth of Barking, who died September the 13th, 1889, aged 49 years. Not lost, but gone before. Also the above named Joseph Louth, who died June the 20th, 1902, aged 87. Thy will be done. Also of Richard Louth, and I know that Richard Louth was a bell ringer here, and he's the son of the above, who died May the 5th, 1928, and it's got Heaven's Morning Breaks. He was fairly young, Richard Louth. He was, oh God, what did she say he was? I think he was less than 40 years old. He was a bell ringer. Basically, he had an accident. He fell over and broke one of his ribs. Had to rest in bed, unfortunately, in the days before they knew about moving you around. He got pneumonia and ended up dying fairly young. But he was one of the bell ringers here, in affectionate remembrance. And we are nearly up to 30 minutes. I'll cover you to this one. This is one of my interesting ones. Anyone that's seen me do anything at St Anne's at Limehouse, you'll have heard me speak about Captain... Oh, nearly fell over then. Captain Bennett, and someone smashed a glass bottle all over that. That's bang out of order. Captain James Bennett. Captain James Bennett, he lived in Limehouse originally. He was obviously a sea captain, quite well off. His wife, 2 of his children, and I think they were his only children, 2 of the servants, and himself, all contracted, it was dysentery or cholera. They all died. He survived with 1 servant. His sister came down from the countryside. They saw what was going on in London, and they decided to get the hell out of there, and they sold up and moved to Barking here. But I've shown you his wife and the servant's grave. The wife, and it's nice really, because servants were normally just popped into a parish cheap grave, but he must have thought fairly well of them because he had them buried together. But Captain James Bennett was, and it wasn't much known in his lifetime. People knew he was well off and that he was very kind, but he was known as a private man of kindness. He talked to the vicar and old Mrs. Martha Parsons over there. They were the best ones to get the information out. What person, oh, this is happening with this one's suffering with this one. And usually fairly late at night, that person would get a visit from Captain Bennett or Captain Bennett's maid, and their problem, if it was monetarily fixable, would be fixed for them. Yeah, a very, very good man. And he died in 1716 at the age of 76. And as you see, people still put flowers on the grave to this day. You'll see in a minute over here, on the other side, he has his favourite symbol of the sea. The reason Captain Bennett, who was already retired when they lived in Limehouse, although he was a fairly young man, he'd obviously made his money and was able to retire. The old sea captains often liked to be by the Thames or by a river, so they could feel the breeze on their face and still have the sense of the sea. And that was the same with this man. He lived to a good old age. There's a fair bit known about him. Him, Mrs. Martha Parsons, and my ancestress, Old Mother Lee, all got on very well together. And from what the vicar writes, that although they were persons of quality, which means they were upper class and a bit well off, they treated poorer people just normally and seemed to have had a good old laugh with my ancestress, who used to be carried in on a chair. So yeah, and by the time they'd all grown old together, there's a description, and I love this, the vicar wrote that he saw them, they all came in through the gate there, and they was laughing and whatnot, and he went over to them and said, "What makes you so merry, you old rascals?" And Mrs. Martha Parsons basically said, "Lords, if we could see ourselves now such a broken down old hulks." And the old captain here agreed, "Aye, madam." He went, "But there's still a sail or 2 left in us yet." And they all laughed together, which I absolutely love that type of thing, because you don't often get detail like that. And that's through hours and hours of pouring through records and a lot of help from Carol and friends here. And we are up to 30 minutes. join me again for part 2.